Hello and a very warm welcome to No One Gets Out of Here Alive. My name is Holly Leon Hawke and I will be taking you on a gentle, sometimes humorous and sometimes challenging meander through the myths, beliefs and ideas around all things end of and after life. In this series of podcasts, I will be chatting with a whole range of guests, from sound artists, willow weavers, through to end-of-life doulas, and people who have had near-death experiences to help give you a more holistic, rounded view, with just maybe a few new possibilities of how the inevitable can be approached. Because remember, no one, not even you, gets out of here alive. And I'm delighted to have with me today the incredible Rosie Inman Cook, manager of both the Natural Death Centre and the Association of Natural Burials. We've got so much to get through today, Rosie, so we're just going to dive straight in. Can you give us a brief history of the Natural Death Centre and how you came to be part of this amazing charity?
So the Natural Death Centre started nearly 30 years ago by a couple of people in London, Nicholas and Josephine and their friends, who felt that there should be an organisation that mirrors the blossoming natural childbirth movement, which empowered people to take control back over a natural function. And they felt there was something missing, an equivalent missing at the end of life. So they wanted to educate people and take away some of the mystery that had been captured by the funeral industry, and who make it out that it's all very complicated and that you absolutely need them.
And so, how did you become part of it then? How was your involvement?
Well, I was running a natural burial ground back in the last century. My old dad used to say to me, when I pop my clogs, stick me at the bottom of the garden and plant an apple tree on me. And so whilst I was looking into the feasibility of doing that, I came across the growing natural death and natural burial movement. And I was between batches of children and decided to have a career change and landed up running a natural burial ground. And 7 years into that, I realised how brilliant the Natural Death Centre was. It had supported me incredibly through an organisation it has under its umbrella called the Association of Natural Burial Grounds. And I realised how wonderful it was. The charity got into financial difficulty, and the patrons and trustees at the time were going to shut it down. And I was horrified at this thought. So I took a sideways step and took it over, really, to keep it going. Moved it out of its London office down to my dining room in Hampshire, and got it back in the black. And then we published, with a new set of trustees, we published a 5th edition of the handbook, the Natural Death Handbook. And so it all went from there, really.
Wow. And that was how long ago?
Oh, Lord, 2007, when I got involved, yeah.
So quite a while. And I must say, you're an absolute inspiration to me, Rosie, and we've talked about this before, and you're a big reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, because you've given me the confidence. Because you touched on something earlier, which I have it's a real bugbear, where it's called the funeral industry, and the fact that it's, there's all this mystery around it, and it's taken away from people. So along those lines, I would really like you to share with our listeners some of the myths that are out there that are really prevalent and put people off from becoming more involved.
Okay. Well, I think I can. So I'm answering the helpline, helping people with a variety of issues and problems. And I think one of the things that happened to me in January absolutely brought it home to me that I wasn't just all talk, and I had a bit of trouser. So my old mum died back in January. She was 93. and we managed to keep her out of care homes, and we'd kept her at home. So she died in her own bed. It was all expected and done. She was calm, and it was great, as deaths go, I suppose. I kept her at home for 3 days. So she died on the Monday and I buried her on the Thursday. I kept her body at home. She stayed in her own bed. Once the GP had been to confirm that she actually had gone, I packed her with ice packs that we'd got ready, and rotated those just to get her core body temperature down. Her carers came back and helped me dress her in some new 100% cotton pajamas, and we wrapped her in her pink Whitney blanket and placed her in a coffin that I'd picked up from a supplier in Chichester. And my 2 teenage daughters decorated the outside of the coffin with floral stuff from her garden. We kept her in the conservatory overnight for the last night, and then in the morning 4 of us popped her in the back of the car and drove her up to the natural burial ground. It was beautiful. It was easy. The vicar came because she wanted a Christian committal. So the vicar from the parish came up to the natural burial ground, and we toasted her with a whiskey and ginger, and we turned it round in 3 days. And it was so easy. And my 16-year-old was the only one of my children who actually wanted to see Mum. And I said to her after she'd been into the room with her, and I said, right, describe to the others, how did Granny look? And I was really surprised at the one word she used was smooth. She said Granny looked smooth. Now, I'd put a little bit of foundation on and brushed her hair and everything, but she, and I'd supported her chin with a rolled up towel, and it was just so straightforward and easy. And she looked smooth, no wrinkles, no worry. And the carers had no idea you could do this. They were complete converts. They said, this is fantastic. We're going to do this for our mums. The district nurse had no idea you could do it, but thought it was a good idea. The GP had no idea you could do it. And she was from Romania, lovely GP. And she said, fantastic, just like back home. The one person I had trouble with was the registrar. So I'd gone through all the process of registering Mum's, her husband's name, parents, where she was born, blah, 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 blah. Got to the end of the conversation and she said, now, who am I sending the green form to? Now, considering that pre-COVID, green forms would be given to families anyway to pass on to the funeral directors or the cemetery or whatever. I said, oh, that would be me. Electronically, because of COVID, everything's done over the phone now. Send it to me. No, she said, you don't understand, the funeral director. Who is it? I said, yes, no, that's me. I'm looking after Mum. And this went back and forth several times. And in the end, I said, look, why don't you just send the green form to the cemetery? And she said, I see. So the cemetery are the funeral directors. And it was like, no, okay, whatever, just get on with it. And I wrote her a lovely email. I wasn't trying to be too aggressive at it, but she didn't respond afterwards. No. So I sort of, tried to. So, but that absolutely demonstrated for me how people who are at the front line, the gatekeepers, we call them, the professionals who are around people who are suffering a bereavement, whether it's the police, the coroners, the nurses, the medics, the doctors, nobody knows what is legal and possible in the UK. And it is extraordinarily frustrating.
And shocking, isn't it? It's so shocking. And it really prevents people from being able to have a more connected and beautiful experience at the end, because it can be, as you've demonstrated. And so that's one myth, isn't it? The first myth is you do not have to use a funeral director in the UK.
Absolutely. For lots of families, they don't have a practical, pragmatic family. They might have no family left. Yeah. So they have to use a funeral director. And in those situations, our mantra has always been shop around. Funeral directors vary enormously in their mission, their standards, and their price. I think the public think that funeral directors are funeral directors. They're all the same. In my book, a lot of them are all the same, and that's that they're rubbish. But that's another issue. But you must shop around and find the goodies, the good eggs out there.
So how do they find the good eggs?
ask appropriate questions.
Mm.
I mean, that apparently is the thing. The majority of people go with the first funeral director they speak to, because they fall into some sort of trusting Stockholm syndrome type torpor. I don't know how to explain it, but with any other purchase, people would shop around, wouldn't they? But they're exhausted, they're in shock, they're bereft.
Yeah. Absolutely. I was actually up in, what was it, last year? I think it was, up in talks with the Competitions and Marketing Authority to talk about, how families are possibly taken advantage of at around funerals. And one question was, are all families who suffer bereavement, do they suffer shock? Are they really in such a bad place that they can't make a decision as you would normally? And well, of course they're not, because no matter how expected a death is, the reality is when death actually comes, it will always throw you into some level of shock. So then you have this this scenario where people are vulnerable. Then they have they're not prepared. Most people will not engage with the subject at all, so they're not prepared. They don't know the answer, the questions to ask. They don't know what they're looking for. But you've got a list on the Natural Death Centre. You've got a list of questions, haven't you, to ask potential funeral directors?
We have got a document. I haven't looked at it, to be honest, for a while. But we have got a document that's freely available if anybody needs that. Questions to ask a funeral director, I think it's called.
Yeah.
But I think you need to, if you can't have those conversations with somebody who's dying, and we all know the scenario, somebody's really poorly, you don't want to start talking about death. You want to talk about the next line of treatment or whatever. It's very unusual to be able to steer the conversation round to, okay, well, what happens if?
Yes.
You need to have those conversations now while you're alive and well, and make sure you've pre-warned and pre-armed people with the information so that that takes more stress off. I speak to so many people who phone me up who think that the answer to all this is to take out a prepayment plan.
Go on. Tell us about prepayment plans.
I would say mostly rotten products.
Yes.
And to be really, really careful. And actually, it's, yes, the money's relevant, but it might be better to just leave clear instructions, who to phone, what sort of funeral you want, what you don't want is actually possibly even more important, and just say there is money available here. If you take out a prepayment plan, you're paying arrangement fees, you're paying extra, you're paying commissions, and you don't necessarily get what you want. And it might, the small print might quite well say that the disbursement fees, the third party payments, aren't actually guaranteed. So the family will end up having to find money in the end anyway.
Absolutely.
Funeral wishes form. There's another form that we give out for free.
You do, good. So they can just go onto the website, download that, and it's there. Or if they can't find it, just ring up the helpline and I'll ping it through. Because with many prepayment plans, as with say 99% of funeral directors, it is a standard package, isn't it? Gold, silver, bronze, maybe an eco in there as well, a token eco. And so basically your choice is just assuming you want a limo, even, they assume you want a limo and a hearse. And so there's no choice. There is no choice, is there, at all, really? I mean, it's just so restricted and
outdated,
so outdated, isn't it? And it's outdated because people don't want to engage with the subject, death and dying, even though no one gets out of here alive. We're all going to the same place, wherever that is. But we all try and pretend it's not happening. So, but I always like to say it's a little bit like, going for your driving test, having never even sat in a car before. So you have no idea how to drive this car, and you go in to your test expecting to pass. And people approach the end of life like that. They expect to not engage with it, but be able to have a peaceful passing and a good funeral. But how on earth can you if you have no idea? You can only make a choice if you know all the options, which people don't. So another thing on that. So first, don't need to use a funeral director. Can organise it all yourself. Secondly, you can, as you did, keep the body at home, as we once did.
Yeah, mum behaved really, really well. I mean, yes, she was only at home for 3 days, and I got her chilled down as quickly as I could once the GP had been. It might have been a different story if it was a blazing heat wave in July or something. But, there's just common sense things. But it's it's the delay that is involved with using a funeral director that is just so bizarre. This the funeral's not for 3-4 weeks time has become the norm. That's not normal. That's just ridiculous. I have my own theories as to why this happens. But I think I've already done enough funeral director bashing already. So I'll. But I mean, yeah, I've buried my dad, my mum, my mother-in-law. We turned these funerals round well within a week, within half a week, most of them,
because you were prepared.
Yes, I suppose it. Yeah. But as I was saying, answering the helpline, it's reassured. I've reassured myself, having just done mums, that it is so easy. It is so straightforward. And the biggest hassle I had was the stupid woman at the registry office.
Who, through no fault of her own, just didn't know. And as you say, they just don't know.
Education. It's education not only of the public, it's education of professionals.
Yes.
That's the problem.
Yes. That's probably the biggest.
That's doom and gloom. When I started burying people in 1999, most people hadn't heard of any sort of these alternatives, but at least now most people have got a clue about natural burial, for example, as an option. Even though, again, they have to, if that's what they want, they have to demand it, because the funeral industry will not promote natural burial because it takes too long. They like a nice, quick, efficient turnaround at the crematorium, get more funerals in the day with the same group of men, women, bearers, staff, and vehicles.
And that's key, isn't it? Because for most funeral directors, it is very much a business, and it's about profits. Yes, they may be very, well-meaning within that, but there are no time. There's just no time. And if there's one thing, end of life, when somebody's died, you cannot put a time limit on how long it takes families to be able to say their goodbyes in whatever way that is. And so to try and move it away from an industry back to, some kind of, true vocational profession, really. Because I think, because you're dealing with such raw emotions. And, one of my kind of bugbears is that we have all this support prior to death, amazing services for, hospice, Macmillan nurses, doctors, everyone, they're all around. Then at the very moment when the rest of the family need them the most, that's it, they're gone. Find your funeral director and off you go. Into what? So with regards to natural burials, there's so much confusion as to what a natural burial is. So many people say to me, I just want to be buried, I want to be a tree. And then what they mean by that it's all different things. So run us through that, Rosie, if you're happy to.
That's a brilliant question, and it's very opportune, because this week I had a phone call from a gentleman who had buried a member of his family 2.5 years ago in a woodland burial ground. Am I allowed to do that? Is that really too cliche?
Yes.
But I'm just trying to emphasize the fact that there are woodland burial grounds and woodland burial grounds. Call them eco, call them green, call them natural burial grounds. He phoned up horrified. Now, I know you're sitting down. He had paid at a site that is, I must say, not a member of our association and would not be allowed to join our association. He paid £15,000, Holly, for a single plot in the Woodland Burial Ground, but he was happy to do it because it was part of woodland that he had played in as a child, and it was a very special place for him. And over Christmas, he got contacted by the company. They run a big cemetery, conventional cemetery part. They've got the Jewish cemetery part. They've got the woodland burial part. They have apparently done a deal with one of the London boroughs, the organisation, and the woodland adjacent to his woodland burial area was sold, for want of a better word, to this London borough to create a religious burial ground, shall we say, for a certain sector of their population. And they've grubbed up the woodland. It is gone, and him and his £15,000 burial and the 11 other plots around his parent are now, he described it, we are now surrounded by a sea of mud, and this is not what we signed up for.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I cannot understand what would be going through the brains of a company that does this, but buyer beware. If you're going to have a natural burial ground, if you're going to do anything in life, again, it comes back to communication and research, doesn't it? And finding out what on earth and who on earth you're dealing with.
Yes.
Unfortunately, a lot of, shall we say, foreign investment or money that's squirreled away in the Cayman Islands, and venture capital and city money is being targeted at cemeteries. They're seeing cemeteries in the space for cemeteries as a possible place to invest, and people need to be very, very careful. That's the bad news. The good news is we have got nearly 70 fantastic natural burial grounds who I inspect, who follow our code of conduct, and they're beautiful, wonderful people running them. They're diversifying farmers, they're passionate individuals, some of them are charities, a couple of them are religious bodies, I feel fully confident in them. But
wonderful. So a natural burial, a true natural burial, is slightly different to a woodland burial, isn't it? A municipal cemetery.
Yeah. So a lot of these tricksters are using the name woodland burial.
Yeah.
And basically, they don't give a damn about the original ethos and the principles of a natural burial, which is that you are not interfered with. You're not pumped full of litres of toxic chemicals and have your innards chopped up and washed down the drain.
That's embalming we're talking about.
AKA embalming, yeah. You are buried without plastics. So your clothing, the lining of the coffins, any fixtures, fittings on the coffins, like the normal brass effect handles on 95% of people's chipboard coffins, are actually plastic. Your coffin's not lined with creme film, which is a non-degradable plastic. That you're wearing natural fibre clothes, that the pillow that your head is on is stuffed with a biodegradable fabric, that the coffin is biodegradable but hopefully sustainably produced and hasn't got too many carbon, the footprint isn't too great, so it's produced sensibly and responsibly. Then you've got to consider the depth at which the body is buried. Shallower the better, with regards to your nutrients being usable again, and the decay of the body isn't what they call anaerobic, which some say produces methane and is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So a nice shallow burial, that you're in a burial ground that won't let people put vases and plastic flowers and lots of stuff that is a hazard to wildlife, and that is a pain in the butt if you're the actual groundsman and you're having to move it all out of the way to cut the grass or maintain it, just without what we refer to as grief litter. It's clutter, it's stuff that is an eyesore on most cemeteries, to be honest, in my humble opinion. And And what's the last thing? Flowers, yeah. And the maintenance of the ground. The flowers that aren't imported, hot housed abroad and flown in. So the air miles and the carbon footprint of the floral memorialization and stuff. So that's a consideration. But some of these rotters, these burial grounds, they just want to take the money. They want to take the money again off bereaved people, and they don't give a damn about the wildlife and the management of habitats and all the other things that the brilliant natural burial grounds, that's what they're doing. They're creating a valuable green space that's good for people, good for wildlife, good for the planet. It's a win-win-win.
Yeah.
But, it's just such a shame that all these rascals are jumping on the bandwagon.
Rascals. I like that. It's a nice way of putting it. And yes, so always advise everybody to go to the Association of Natural Burials to be able to have a list of recommended sites. So some of the costs are just astronomical. I've been so shocked by how much people charge. And just touching on embalming, it's not something we all like to really talk about, but this is kind of, can be, what would you say, Rosie? Is it a standard practice amongst funeral directors?
I get the impression that a lot of funeral directors who haven't got proper refrigerated facilities like to do it. And also those larger organisations that operate a hub body storage warehouse system, which means that they have lots of satellite little shops on high streets, and Mr. and Mrs. Brown might ask to go in on a Tuesday afternoon to see and sit with their mum, but they don't know that mum's not in the little local branch where she lived and where they live. No, she's off in another part of another borough in a big warehouse, and then so the order will go through and her body will get shipped out, put in a van, driven across town, unloaded, put in the viewing room. When they've gone, then she'll get shipped out, and so bodies are transporting all over the place, and presumably because they're out of refrigeration for those in those situations, those FDs prefer to embalm. The other thing that I can't get my head around is that the funeral directors, they have this obsession. Is it an obsession? I don't know. They think they have the responsibility to protect people from the realities of death by somehow making it out that it's not real. So they think it's better that somebody doesn't look dead.
Yes.
Now, when you've nursed or been with somebody who has looked pretty shitty for several months because they've been grey and, they've been wasting away through some horrible illness, the funeral directors think that it's better to make them suddenly look pumped up and pink and vibrant and full of life again. Now, I just don't get that.
As if that's going to help with the letting go. Yeah.
I don't know why. Well, and I then consequently then get families phoning up who've had an extremely disturbing experience with these altered bodies, and it's just like, well, who is this? This isn't her. She didn't look like that last week.
Yeah.
What the hell have you done to her?
Yeah.
So I mean, the things they do that they think is normal and acceptable, to shoot a suture through people's gums, to tie their jaws together, to put plastic formers inside people's eyes and then glue their eyelids shut, and to put plastic chicken fillets in their cheeks to plump their faces up. I mean, and to fill them with pink dye. I mean, how is that respectful? It's just,
yes, that's true.
I mean, if families have that explained to them and they say, "Oh yes, we'd like that," well then fine. I'm pro-choice. I'm not trying to say things are right or wrong, but just that by using euphemisms and by people being ignorant through really, is it no fault of their own, or are the public their own worst enemy? I'm not sure there, but. I don't know, Holly, what do you think? Why do we do this? strangest thing.
It's bonkers, isn't it? It is absolutely bonkers because, well, do you know, actually, you talking, it reminded me of, I had a chap who worked for us for a while, and he came from a traditional funeral directors, and he said how he was trained to say to every animal, every animal, oh my goodness, every person. So yeah, he was trained to say to every family that came out of the room after they'd spent time with the person that they love, or not, because not everybody loves the person who's died.
No.
But to say, didn't they look good? Didn't they look good? Didn't they look nice? And he had to say that as part of his job, which because the funeral directors were desperate for this for every family to walk away having it be a good experience for them. Whereas, you know, in the years I've been doing this, it's having proper human heart-to-heart connection with people, supporting them. Like you say, you know, people have normally been with that person through the dying process. A lot of people do die of old age and long illnesses, so they get used to how they're looking. And if they're prepared for, you know, if there are any changes, and then supported through that. Every single one that I have supported in doing that has found it a very helpful experience. In, you know, and also, you know, along those lines, helping to wash and dress, you know, that can be a really powerful and important part for families to be involved with. But equally, that quite often would involve needing to have somebody, because the general public lack so much wisdom and knowledge that we used to have, you know, prior to the NHS. We had this wisdom, but it's vanished. To support them, to help that to wash and dress in a way that helps them. It's not rocket science. It's easy, but people are so frightened by it because of all these myths and perceived, you know, or even just horror films and things like that. People, all sorts of things go on in people's minds. And you're right. There, as I say to people, there's no right or wrong with any of it. It is just what's right for you. But you've got to know. You've got to know what it is. And most people are sold embalming as hygienic cleansing, aren't they? Without any real knowledge of actually the process, which is quite invasive. And I've never, you know, it's just never been a need. In fact, a friend of mine died a few years ago now, and his dearest friend and his fiancée went in to see him. So they were with him when he died. They went in to see him after the funeral directors had been, and they got the giggles because they were like, "That's not him," because they'd glued his mouth together. So it looked all very strange. And they ended up trying to play with his mouth to try and get him to look more like him, you know, rather than, you know, so quite often people will die and their mouths will just be gently open. You know, if you don't close it before, you know, rigour sets in, then they'll just be but quite often people die like that anyway. You know, they're through the dying process, they're breathing heavily. So the fact it's not necessarily a distressing thing, and I think that's the key, isn't it? Yeah. There's so much projection by the industry as to what people can and can't cope with, rather than giving people the granting them the what's the word? I can't think of the word, but
it's permission and empowerment.
Yes,
it?
absolutely. One thing.
Can I pick
go.
up on a couple of things? Yeah,
go.
Can I pick up on a couple of things you've said there? I mean, so when I laid my mum out, yes, she'd been unconscious for a couple of days at the end, really, and her mouth was open and her tongue was very dry and everything. But I rolled up a towel really, really tight and really firm and jammed it in between her jaw and onto her collarbones, and then picked her head up and put an extra pillow behind, and her mouth just shut beautifully and stayed shut, and it was so easy. So and we had the smooth effect. So you know, and and I didn't have to do anything invasive or violent or intrusive, and all the stuff that they think is normal. If people knew how invasive some of these things, you know, using the trocar which is like a giant liposuction, jabby, steely, bladey thing that they put in through the tummy button, and it's horrible stuff, and it's not necessary. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on that you spoke about, it was this thing of honesty. For 20 odd years, I've been speaking to families about the nitty gritty of what happens and the natural processes of decay and stuff. And I haven't held back. You know me, Holly. I say what I think.
Yes.
And I don't go into sort of gratuitous detail with the bereaved. You know, that would be inappropriate. But I'm honest with people, and I talk about the blood pooling in the back of the ears and around the back of the head, and all the things that, and the discoloration and things that will happen over time. And not once in 20 years has somebody said to me, I wish you hadn't told me that. That is too much information. You've really upset me. Not once. In fact, again and again, people have said, do you know what? You are the first person who has spoken to me honestly and openly, and I haven't felt like I'm a mushroom kept in the dark and fed on bullshit. So I'm really confident. I'm really confident. So that's an old saying. I'm really confident that the public are not idiots, and that they appreciate honesty, and
that's
fed
key.
up with these. That they're fed up with these mealy-mouthed professionals who are saying, "I'm so sorry for your troubles," you know, and you know, trust me, I'm the professional. I know what's right. Yeah.
I know what's best for you. Yes, and people are treated as idiots. And that there is nothing respectful in that. There is absolute respect in people knowing what all their rights are, and then doing what the family wants, not what the funeral director perceives as is respectful or not. It's just,
this is what one thing when the professionals, when somebody dies and the family who have no idea what to do, they look up at the nurse or the hospice volunteer or whatever, and they say, what do we do now? The stock answer is, you appoint a funeral director. Once you are in the hands of the majority of funeral directors, you will get what they want to sell you. I think that has got to be the bottom line. And I would always recommend, if you need to use a funeral director, that you use a really small scale funeral director who won't be doing several funerals in a day or sharing vehicles between branches. They will give you 100% of their attention. And if you want to go off to do a natural burial, they'll be delighted to spend half a day out in the country with their the family they're looking after. You know, it's all time and motion.
It is a bit. That's one thing I have become very, very aware of in doing this work, is that I become almost like a protector of the family from all this pressure from, you know, crematorium staff, professional bearers, drivers, whatever, you know, that are all there, grave diggers wanting to get their job done as quickly as possible, get in and out. And it's like this gentle, no, you just stand back. This family are paying actually a lot of money to have this time here. There is no rush. You just take your time, please. And it can be very, very difficult, because I'm a bit of an empath, and I can literally feel what others are feeling. I can feel an annoyance that we're not being quick enough. But I refuse because people need time. Time is one of the most important things that we need at end of life, which most people don't get.
Can I pick up on that? One of the things we're trying to really promote with our natural burial ground operators is something that has working really well at the South Downs Natural Burial Site, which is one of the busiest ones in the south of England. They have got such a good reputation. I mean, they've got 2,000 people plus buried there now, and the funeral directors trust them enough now so that 50% of the interments are actually family only. So even if a funeral director has been involved with the nitty-gritty end of things, actually caring for the body, picking the person up from where they died, putting them in the coffin, that sort of thing, once they get to the burial site, it's a drop and go, if you like. So that the funeral director doesn't get involved in 2 more hours at the graveside and hanging around twiddling his thumbs while they have a ceremony and all that sort of stuff. And they're trusting that then they'll put the coffin onto the bier and they go off and they can do their next funeral, keep their shoes and their wheel arches clean, and the family can have as much time as they want. And a time-rich experience, rather than having a funeral director and checking his watch at the back there thinking, come on guys, I've got another one at 3:00.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also a myth around there not being enough land in the UK for everybody to be buried, and that's why we need crematoriums. Expand.
Yeah, thank you very much, the Cremation Society of Great Britain, for that little bit of propaganda, very successfully embedded in the brains of the British public since sort of the mid-20th century with their slogan, "Leave the land for the living." Yeah, they did a very good job, so that a lot of people choose cremation because they think it's the responsible choice, the socially responsible choice. Whereas actually now we know about emissions, pollution, carbon footprint, and there wasn't the availability back in the day of natural burial grounds. So people made that decision, and I'm hoping very much that'll start to change and it'll flip back, especially now there is mutterings that councils are looking at and declaring climate emergencies and looking at crematoria as actually part of that. So
really.
Now with regards to space, so the "Leave the land for the living" was the slogan, and every few years, after the Industrial Revolution, when people left the countryside and went into the cities, there was huge demand on urban burial sites. And I mean, we've all heard the stories of the, bodies not, reused of graves and bodies coming out of the ground and being totally disgraceful and disgusting. And the Victorians having to set up funeral trains and stuff and opening burial grounds out of town.
Funeral trains. What's that?
Yeah, they used to have what was the name for them? There'll be people watching this who think he's stupid woman, you should know that. They had they're not the Mortuary Expresses, but what were they called? It was something like that. And they would leave and Brookwood in Surrey was the big out of town where there are hundreds of thousands of people buried, and the trains would leave with the coffins from I don't know, would it have been Waterloo back then? And go down, and that was one solution. But and every few years the BBC pick up on and they think, we'll do a story about councils running out of burial space. Councils have always run out of burial space, and the time ticks down and they think, well, right, we better find another extension or a field or open another one, and they always do. But cremation is obviously it's brilliant for them. They can really use that to fuel their cause.
Yes, literally.
Well, if only it would fuel it, that would be the one problem solved.
I think one cremation is the equivalent of a 500-mile car journey, isn't it, in terms of pollution or something?
It depends on your weight and fat content, how you burn, and also there is various reports about the calorific value of the coffin itself helping with the combustion. Whether that's a fallacy, I'm not sure. But
yes, because people think that a cardboard coffin is the best thing for both cremation and burial. But actually, for cremation, it's not, because actually you need the fuel, and there's not enough fuel in there, so they end up having to burn more gas.
There has been. I haven't read it recently, but there would be other people who would poo-poo that. There's always two sides to the story, but yes, it is potentially. But what is more interesting about cremation, actually? So we go back one step. Councils and authorities and governments across Europe say and recommend and insist, some of them, that you do not burn chipboard in your log burner or on an open fire, because it is full of all sorts of nasty chemicals and things, and it is a huge pollutant. Okay, so you're not supposed to burn chipboard. And as you know, Holly, 95% of coffins in the UK are made of a particle board, chipboard, fiberboard, MDF, that sort of thing. So you shouldn't be burning them. 16,000 tonnes of chipboard are burnt in crematoria in the UK every year. 16,000 tonnes.
That is astonishing, isn't it? It's astonishing that
toxic.
Is allowed when you've got the other regulations, and then that's for some reason that's bypassed. I mean,
yeah, it's cheap. It's cheap and easy, and the funeral directors make a maximum markup on it. You know, they buy a coffin for 60 quid, flog it for 400.
Yeah.
You know, if they buy a cardboard coffin or a sustainably produced coffin, it's going to cost them more, and they're not going to be able to make the markup on it, or they'll put the markup on it, and it makes the coffin £1,000 or more for the family.
That's a really interesting point as well, because that's always been a bit of a bugbear of mine. Is that, you know, why can't funeral directors